Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, if you do enjoy the video that you came here to watch, do me a favor, go ahead and hit that little red subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. It really does help my audience grow. It really does help this channel grow. It means more than you realize. So go ahead, hit that little red button. Also, remember, full episodes of the Aaron Torres Podcast, wherever you download your podcast, Apple, Spotify, etc. Now, here is the video that you came here for.
But there may have never been a better example than this weekend. What I always say, what a lot of people that love college football always say, is this: the weekends that on paper don't look like there's very much going on, those are the ones that always end up being the craziest, right? And Saturday was the best example yet, as just look at everything that happened within the top 10 of college football. TCU needs a miracle sprint-on walk-off field goal to survive against Baylor. USC, obviously that thrilling three-point win over UCLA. Michigan, 3 fourth-quarter field goals after their star running back Blake Corum goes down. We'll talk about Michigan and Ohio State. Ohio State, oh, by the way, took care of business, but Maryland had the ball with under a minute to go and a chance to win. Georgia did not look great against Kentucky. So you have all of these chaotic games that are essentially coming down to the wire. But it is worth noting that there really was only one that really impacted the playoff race. But it was the one that had more impact than maybe any other loss could have. And it was Tennessee losing to South Carolina. And I think that's what speaks to how crazy this weekend was, right? Is that we came in talking about all these crazy hypotheticals. Can Illinois keep things close against Michigan? Is USC going to lose to UCLA as a slight favorite? TCU was a small favorite against Baylor. This was the only game that we were not talking about, Tennessee, South Carolina. I did not hear anybody all week long make the strong case that Tennessee was going to go to South Carolina and lose. Only that is exactly what happened, and they lost in just the most shocking way possible with a final score of 63-38. Now, in terms of why it happened, right, it's pretty straightforward. I think we all know the answers. We all knew that Tennessee's defense was not elite throughout most of the year, but I do think they played really well for big stretches against good teams. They held Kentucky to 6 points. They had a couple other really good games throughout the early part of the season, but obviously Georgia exposed some stuff. And then this game against South Carolina, it was just unreal. Sometimes you have those nights. Spencer Rattler had one of those nights for South Carolina, but this much maligned Tennessee defense could not get stops, not only when it mattered, but pretty much at any point in the game. How about this for a fact? Spencer Rattler came into the game with 8 total touchdown passes. He had 6 against Tennessee, and that was essentially how the game shook out. South Carolina scores 21 first-quarter points, 35 first-half points. Tennessee made it interesting late, interesting in the middle of the third quarter. I mean, it was about 35-31 at one point in the third quarter. South Carolina scores a few minutes later, and the game is essentially over. And so what I want to do now, listen, we're going to talk about Tennessee kind of to wrap this segment. So if you're a Vol fan, one, I don't even know if you're listening on a day like today, but I want to get to the Tennessee aspect of this in a minute. But I do kind of just want to talk about what this means for the playoff picture, because this has major, major, major ramifications. I think you can argue this was the single, not only the most surprising result that we could have had, but I think this is also realistically probably the one result that caused the most chaos in the playoff picture. And let me explain why. You know, all those crazy hypotheticals. Let me even backtrack. The reason this result was so big, okay? So let's transition from the game itself to what it means in the bigger picture. Because what I would say right now at this moment in time is this. Why this is so important, why this game, why this result is bigger than Michigan losing, Ohio State losing, whoever losing. Everybody had pretty much a linear path, right? If Georgia wins, they're in. If Ohio State wins, they're in. If Michigan wins, they're in. If TCU wins, they're in. Meanwhile, there's Clemson and USC. They're teams that needed help going into today. Tennessee, to me, why this is so interesting is because you know all of those crazy college football playoff hypotheticals that we spent all November, all October, early December discussing. Tennessee was really the inflection point of all of those conversations. Why? Because it's what I just said. They were the team that had, they weren't the very clear win and they're in. They're not the very clear they need help. They were somewhere in the middle, and they had what was shaping up to be the most unique resume in college football. If they just won out, if they just won at South Carolina and Vanderbilt next week, they would have had just a fascinating resume going into the final few weeks of the season, because two factors for them that are really not factors for anyone else, or it was just unique with Tennessee. Let me put it that way. It was unique for Tennessee because I think regardless of how everything shook out, of all of the teams that would have been fighting for that third, fourth, fifth spot, third and fourth spot, maybe on the outside looking in, they would have had the best resume. They would have had a win at LSU, which is almost certainly going to finish 9-3 and the SEC runner up. I don't think they're beating Georgia. They, of course, could be the SEC champ. Tennessee had beaten them. And, of course, Tennessee had the win over Bama. That is a resume that would have been better than TCU, even if TCU wins out. It would have been better than USC, even if USC wins out. It would have been better than Clemson, even if Clemson won out. And so on the one hand, they would have had the most interesting resume. On the other hand, they would not have had something that all of those other schools would have needed to get to the college football playoff. They wouldn't have been a conference champ. And so if you like chaos and if you like argument and if you like debate, you wanted Tennessee to win because we were setting up for a very real scenario where we had a one-loss Tennessee versus a one-loss USC that's a Pac-12 champ with an inferior resume, or a one-loss Clemson with an inferior resume, or maybe a TCU losing in the conference championship game. And so I bring it up because all of those crazy conversations really spurned from one simple thing. It was Tennessee winning out, being 11-1, having wins over LSU and Bama, their only loss being to the number one team in the country on the road. And so because they're gone now, it really kind of clears up the playoff picture, right? I'm not a religious person, but something about parting the Red Sea. Well, now the Red Sea is pretty clearly open. And so let's just briefly talk about who are the biggest winners and what this all means for the playoff picture. What this means, I think the biggest winner from Tennessee's loss, the single biggest winner to me, is the USC Trojans, because now the USC Trojans win and you're in if you're USC. Right now, I think we all assume the top three spots in the college football playoff picture are pretty straightforward. Georgia, assuming they win out, right? Georgia Tech and then LSU in the title game. I think they're going to win out, SEC title game. The winner of Ohio State, Michigan is going to get the 2 seed. And then 3, I think most of us kind of feel like, okay, TCU, if they win out, is going to get that 3 seed. So the big debate, again, was number 4, Tennessee versus USC, Tennessee versus this, Tennessee versus that. Well, Tennessee's out of the picture. It moves everybody up. And now USC, it's pretty straightforward. If you win your final 2 games, you are going to make the college football playoff in year 1 under Lincoln Riley. Now, is that going to happen? It's not going to be easy. Next week, they do play Notre Dame at the Coliseum. Notre Dame all of a sudden is playing really well. Obviously, a few weeks ago, took care of Clemson. We all criticized Marcus Freeman early, myself included, but he has done a good job of rallying the troops at Notre Dame. They're going to enter this week as a top 15 team, and this is a team that since that 0-2 start, not great at math, but they're 8-3 right now, which means they've won 8 of 9. They won against Clemson at home. They beat Syracuse. They took care of BYU and North Carolina, which came into yesterday with just 1 loss. So to me, USC is the big winner in all of this because, again, they're the team now that gets bumped up where if they win, the path is there, they are getting in. The real biggest winner, though, I think USC is probably the biggest winner. But the team that's really like got to be feeling good about that loss, and I hate to say it, it's actually South Carolina's biggest rival, Clemson, because Clemson was the team that coming into Saturday, there was no direct path. They, even as a 12-1 ACC champ, they were a team that was going to need help, especially because, oh, by the way, the team that they play in the ACC championship game, North Carolina, which was in the top 15, took a loss last night. So now all of a sudden you look at Clemson's resume. Their best win is probably going to be over a 9-3 Florida State team that's on the fringes of the top 25. We'll see if North Carolina beats, I believe it's NC State this weekend. If they do, they'll probably be on the fringes of the top 25. But Clemson's really not going to have a resume comparable to even a TCU. I would argue even a USC. And so Clemson's the one that needed help. They needed chaos in front of them, and they got it on Saturday night. So to me, Clemson is the biggest winner out of everybody on Saturday with this Tennessee loss. Really quickly, you know who else is sort of a pretty big winner? It is the loser of the Ohio State-Michigan game, especially, by the way, if it's Ohio State. As a matter of fact, going back to Clemson for half a second, and I know I'm bouncing around USC here, Tennessee there, Clemson here. Here's the bottom line with Clemson. Clemson got the first really big break in their conversation for the playoff. Now, they still need help. They probably need a TCU to lose a game or USC to lose before the end of the regular season. But you know what Clemson really needs? Clemson needs Ohio State to beat Michigan, and let me explain why. It's because of that team that I just mentioned that is going to the LA Coliseum this weekend to play USC. It's Notre Dame. Remember, where did Notre Dame open its season? They opened it in Columbus at the Horseshoe against Ohio State. And so that's important because Ohio State has a win over the same Notre Dame team that smacked Clemson. And so for Clemson, if Ohio State were to lose to Michigan, it would almost assuredly guarantee Michigan a playoff spot. But then also Ohio State's probably in the pecking order ahead of you. So to me, if you're a Clemson fan, you are rooting hard for your Clemson Tigers this weekend, and you are rooting hard for Ohio State. Because if Ohio State gets the 2 seed, I actually think Clemson probably has the better resume than a Michigan would as an 11-1 non-Big Ten champ. So that's kind of the setup. That's what you need to know. Michigan and Ohio State, I do think the loser was probably helped a little bit. I still think they're going to be behind Clemson in the race for an at-large. So I think especially if the loser is Michigan, ultimately you need chaos. You need TCU to lose in the conference championship game. You need USC to lose, which, by the way, I still think is on the cards. USC has Notre Dame, and then probably playing Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. But overall, the biggest winners, no doubt to me, USC winning, you're in. Clemson needed chaos. They got it. And I would argue the loser, of the Ohio State-Michigan game was actually helped by this as well.